give it, I know it's on time now, but maybe give it 1 more minute before we start to let a couple of stragglers come in.
Sure. So for those of you who missed the first part of the conversation, we were talking about the cat filter Texas lawyer, which whenever I'm feeling low, always makes me smile. It's about the greatest thing that's ever happened in the history of Zoom. But I can't find the filter. That's what I would like to be able to find, that filter, but I just can't do it. I've looked. So if anyone knows the answer, just send it to me.
Well, it's
Are you sure you want that filter, Aaron?
Yeah, no, I think so. I just finished teaching Fed courts for the semester, and it was all on Zoom. And I think it would have been helpful every once in a while just to liven things up, because that was the hardest teaching I've ever done. All right, Leanna, you think we should get started?
I do indeed.
All right, let's get started. Take it away.
Great. So we'll start with a quick roll call. We've been here for the other meetings, but I'll say it again. We are doing this to test that everyone's audio and video are working. So if when I call your name, you can unmute and say here, we'd appreciate it. I will start with the members of the Committee on Administration and Management who have both voting and speaking privileges. Aaron Nielsen.
Hello.
David J. Appel. Warren Belmar. Jody Bernstein. Marshall J. Breger. Amy Bunk. John F. Cooney. Bridget C. E. Dooling. Tobias Dorsey. Fred F. Fielding. David C. Frederick. William Funk.
Here.
I know, I'm not sure you unmuted, Bill.
Here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Robert Gerard. Who I know I saw. Perhaps he will be back. Claire Green. Allison Ho.
Here.
John M. Kamensky.
Here.
Mohammed H. Mesbahi serving as alternate for Eric Lopresti. Jennifer No. I think she's going to be late. And Joseph O'Connell.
Here.
Nina Olson. Jesse Panuccio. Elizabeth Papez. Eloise Pasikoff. Kate Shaw. Lauren A. Smith. Max Steer. And Jim Tozy.
Here. Here.
All right, next I will call the names of people who are ACUS members who are not on the committee. Robert Stone.
Here.
Stephanie Tatham.
Present.
Carrie Ricci. Deborah Aiken serving as alternate for Jonathan Doles.
Here.
Radha Vishnu Vajala serving as alternate for Peter J. Constantine.
Here.
Helen Serasio serving as alternate for Carol Ann Siciliano.
Present, thanks.
Thanks. Hillary Hunning serving as alternate for Christina McDonald.
I'm here. Thank you.
And David Rasker serving as alternate for Charlie Maresca.
Here.
Great. Are there any members of the committee or members of ACUS or their alternates who I have not called or who hopped in partway through while I was calling roll?
Robert Gerard from OPM. I lost my connection briefly.
Understandable. Happens to the best of us. John Cooney, also I see you. Can we hear you? I think you might be muted.
Sorry, I'm here.
Great. All right, if that takes care of everyone, I'll turn it over to Matt for any opening remarks that he may have.
I have none, and I'd just like to turn it back over to Aaron and have a good meeting.
Thanks, Matt. So real fast, this is the third of 3 meetings. We're going to finish it up today. Just a few ground rules that'll be helpful for everyone. ACUS asks that if you can, you have your video on. It's easier for us to communicate if we can see you. I'm not going to be a super stickler about that. I recognize that life is hard in Zoom times, so do what you have to do. But to the extent that you can have your camera on, that is helpful. Likewise, because we're not all in the room together, it's easiest for me to keep a queue. If you, in the comment bubble, you say, comment, and we don't have substantive conversations going on in the comments. Otherwise, I can't possibly keep track of everybody at once. And then we're gonna get to the vote, and when the time comes for a vote, I will have I'll go through the specific rules on that. But that's where we are now. So, Leanne, if you could bring us back to where we were, and we'll finish this up. We'll finish up the recommendations, and then we'll go through the preamble.
All right, is the recommendation visible?
It is.
Perfect.
And we got through 10, right? Are we starting on 11?
Yeah, I think we were in the middle of 11 and there was an ongoing discussion about that when we had to stop.
Okay, well, let's just start again at 11, and we'll just go from there. So 11 is ensuring adequate resources and staffing. This is how to do the periodic retrospective review. And we'll just start with, we'll go 11A, 11B, 11C, 11D. So let's start with the text of 11. Leanne, you want to read that for us?
Sure. Agencies should
just the first part through A.
Okay. Agencies should decide how to best structure their staffing of periodic retrospective reviews to foster a culture of retrospective review. Below are examples of some staffing models which may be used in tandem or separately. A, assigning the same staff the same regulation or category of regulation each time it is reviewed. This approach allows staff to gain expertise in a particular kind of regulation, thereby potentially improving the efficiency of the review.
All right. So we went through this last time, and this is the language that we ended up with, but we were kind of rushed at the end. So let's just pause, reactions, comments, thoughts on this. Does this work as a framework? And then if so, does A work? Does anybody have comments? All right, hearing none, then it sounds we're still on board with that. B, can you read that for us, please, Leanne?
Assigning different staff the same regulation or category of regulation each time it is reviewed. This approach promotes objectivity by allowing different viewpoints to enter into the analysis.
Comments, reactions? Okay, all right, let's do C. Leanne?
Engaging or cooperating with experts, either within or outside the agency, to review regulations. And
I remember we had the conversation about this. Not hearing no comments, let's take D.
Pairing subject matter experts such as engineers, economists, and scientists with other agency employees in conducting the reviews. This approach maximizes the likelihood that both substantive considerations, such as the net benefits of the regulation, and procedural considerations, such as whether the regulation conflicts with other regulations or complies with plain language requirements, will enter into the review.
Okay, all right, this is new. We have not done D yet. Comments, reactions about D or anything else in 11? If we were all together, I would look around the room at this point and see if we're all just like, yeah, we're all okay with this one, let's just move on. Or somebody looks like they have concern on their face. I'm not hearing any concern and I'm not seeing any concern. So if not, I'm inclined to go to the next one, but I want to make sure that Zoom is not hindering our ability to have that conversation. Okay, hearing
I
none.
see, Aaron, I see a couple of hands raised.
You see
It's not
hands raised.
comments. Yeah,
I'm not seeing it in the comments. I'm sorry. Who's got hands raised?
I think it's Jonathan and David Rasker.
Okay, Jonathan and then David. And if you could please just put it in the chat function for me, that would be helpful. Just say comment.
Okay. Yeah, I had used the hand raise function in the participants list, but and I'm also happy to defer to Dave since I'm the consultant on the report. I can wait.
All right, Dave, you want to go first?
Yeah, just D doesn't strike me necessarily as along the same vein as A, B, and C. I think I was the one who was seriously questioning A last week, but it was not a hill to die on. I just point out that for an agency like, again, EPA is where I have the most experience working with. The core group is engineers, economists, and scientists. And it is the same engineers, economists, and scientists doing each rule over and over again. So it's not it's not clear to me what D is telling the agency to do other than put together a team that's going to write a rule. What are we meaning to say that is different than do your work to write a good rule? I'm sort of asking out of what do we want to say here, because it's not clear that this tells me something new.
Jonathan?
Okay. If you're asking me to respond to Dave's point.
I assume that's what you're going to say, is that if it's something separate, I'll let you have 2 bites at the apple here. One,
Okay.
from your report, is there, or Lori can chime in here, is there a reason that that this fits with what came up in your interviews? And then once you've got that, then I'll let you have the floor again.
Lori may want to add, I think the idea of 11D, which may come from some evidence in our report, but also perhaps from past ACAS recommendations on retrospective review, like in 2014-5, but is the multidisciplinary expertise is helpful in identifying both the substantive and procedural considerations. For example, 11D mentions engineers, economists, and scientists, but doesn't necessarily mention lawyers or other policy kinds of experts. So maybe that's the idea. My other point is unrelated to 11D. My other point, just for the committee's consideration, recognizing that I'm not a member of this committee, I'm a member of another committee and consulting to this on this report, is that in the first sentence of 11, it might be helpful, I think, and would be supportive of or reflective of what's in our report, that at the end of the sentence, after foster a culture of retrospective review, we might add and ongoing learning, which was because what we found in the discussion of staffing with agencies was that the agencies had success in periodic review, repeated periodic review, when they organized their staffing to make it an ongoing process rather than a single look back. So the sentence says, structure their staffing of periodic retrospective reviews to foster a culture of retrospective review, but it would be helpful to flag the ongoing or continuous learning process. That was my other thought, but that Thank you.
Perfect. Anne, we'll get back to ongoing learning. I don't expect there's gonna be a lot of pushback on that, but we'll circle back on that. Anne, you had a comment?
Yeah, I have two quick comments. The first about the potential overlap. And of course, I was debating with Dave at the end of the last session. I think it might help to sort of address his concern. I mean, if you look at C, it does talk about engaging or cooperating with experts, and then D is about a certain class of experts. And to put a little more space between C and D, I assume the intent is engaging or cooperating with subject matter experts, because then D is saying, well, outside of subject matter experts, there are certain methodologies or other types of expertise that may be valid. And of course, there may be some overlap, of course, between C or D on one hand and A or B on the other hand. That doesn't bother me. And then the second quick comment is I like having D because empirical studies have shown at the EPA and other agencies in the last 40 years, kind of shift in who is actually working on regulations, right? It used to be majority scientists and now is majority lawyers. And so, especially if we're thinking about the wide range of federal agencies, is I would like to keep in D for that reason.
Thank you. John Kaminsky.
There's a presidential directive from Biden to have retrospective reviews of the impact of existing regulations on social inequities. And that wouldn't capture, would that be captured under subject matter experts? Or not quite subject matter experts on the topic of the regulation, but it's sort of the impact. Is there some way of capturing or reflecting that in here?
I suspect that there is. What do we think? Well, I guess let's just do this sequentially. Do we think that Anne's addition of subject matter experts does enough to separate C and D? The other way that we could do it is combine C and D, so it kind of maps the structure of A and B. So it would be, C would be engaging or cooperating with experts, either within or without the agency, to review regulations. This approach maximizes the likelihood that, and finish that. So take the second sentence of D and put it with C so it matches how we do A and B. Dave, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm wondering if D is in fact a parallel to A, B, and C, and whether it should perhaps be a separate number.
I didn't hear the last thing you said.
I'm wondering whether D should in fact be a separate numbered recommendation. The recommendation being that these reviews should be conducted with subject matter experts to ensure that the full range of substantive considerations are included. 11 seems to be about where to pull the staff from in terms of reporting. Is it going to be the same folks that did it before? Is it going to be different folks? Is it going to be inside the agency? Is it going to be outside the agency? D is you should be looking at a multidisciplinary group, and that doesn't seem to be as much of a choice as A, B, and C. So should D be recommendation 12 and say the agency should include subject matter experts such as engineers, economists, and scientists in collaboration with attorneys in conducting the review to ensure that other substantive considerations are included, such as.
Anne, what do you think? Can I call on you? Is that okay?
I like it separate. I understand this issue of the overlap, but at least C and D flag for me, sort of, you could think of them as sort of additional concerns or additional staffing the agency might want to consider.
What do you think about Dave's idea to make D into 12?
Oh, but but how does, I don't feel strongly either way, I guess. I guess I feel weakly that it should just stay as it is.
Okay, now this is where I would look around the room and I would get a sense for, is this something that, Dave is by himself on, or if it looks like a lot of people are in that place. I can't very well do a straw poll here. So I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say the default is we kind of keep it as it is. If somebody doesn't like the default, please speak up now, so I can have a sense for where the room is. So if you like it as it is, with C and D as separate, but not D as 12, don't say anything. If you don't like that, please say something. Okay, hearing none, then then we're going to keep it that way, at least for now. Keeping it that way, Dave, is there a way that we can make sure that your point is getting addressed?
My point was to a very extent stylistic, that I just felt that the 4 paragraphs aren't parallel structures and that they emphasize different things. So if it would be, it's not a matter of adding and removing words. It's thinking about the issue as 2 separate concepts. One, the staffing structure versus the staffing personnel. I mean, so I don't, if the committee's decision is you keep the 4 paragraphs, there's no real tweak, I think, that I would suggest.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron, can I point out something that might actually be responsive?
Yes, please.
I was just going to point out, I don't think that these were meant to be entirely parallel, because when we drafted it, we included the language about they may be used in tandem or separately. And so there is some assumption that these will overlap or be most useful when paired, instead of treating them as like discrete choices and you may only have one.
No, thank you. I mean, the one, again, I don't feel strongly about this. The one thing that is frustrating to me is we have in A, B, and D a sentence that says what the structure would be. Then we have a sentence that says why that structure might be valuable. We don't have that for C. C, we just say that, and then we go to D. So that was my thought why we might want to combine C and D. But I don't, again, it's not the end of the world if we don't do that, but it feels like we should have a sentence that begins, this structure, this approach promotes something in C, so it looks like the others. But again, I don't, this is not the hill to die on. So if that's, if that's not bothering anybody else, it's not bothering me that much. Hearing none, we still have John's comment, which I want to make sure we address. John's comment was, where do we fit in looking back at effects of regulation? Does that, who does that? Like, is that the engineers? Is that the economists? Is that the scientists? Is that the staff? How do we fit that in? John, have you had any thoughts about where that might fit in language-wise?
Well, I think it would fit in D, but I'm not an expert in the language. It's somehow representing diversity and inclusion type stuff, but I don't know what the best framing of that language might be. So it's not just an inwardly looking by technicians. It's not necessarily public comments, but it's somebody that would be on the inside that would have those kinds of perspectives.
And
Apologies, I was just about to type, I take my comment back.
okay.
I had an idea, but it doesn't work. I'll see if I come up with another.
Okay, Bill and then Jonathan.
How about adding sociologists to the list of experts, just to show that we're not talking just about technicians, but the addressing some of the issues that the executive order might include.
Yeah, that may capture it, but
Jonathan.
Yeah, in 11D, perhaps to help with John Kamensky's point, the second sentence talks about substantive considerations such as the net benefits. So that should include the effects of the regulation, but perhaps it would be helpful to add there, such as the net benefits and distributional equity of the
yes, okay.
regulation.
There
And that
you
would
go.
get to, I think John mentioned something like that in his comment.
Yeah, thank you.
Robert Gerard.
Yeah, actually, the follow-up on Bill's comment, I think that sociologists, it might be a little too specific, but if there could be perhaps a reference to like economists and other social scientists, because, for example, our agency consults with industrial organizational psychologists when doing rulemaking.
Is that helpful comment, Bill?
I 6 of one, half does the other. I don't care. It's fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Matt.
I'm just wondering if anyone or whether we should review the executive order. I think we're talking about 13985, if I remember, to see if it requires or provides for any or identifies specific agency personnel who should be assigned responsibility for the kind of issues we're talking about.
Okay.
Not an executive order, it's a presidential memorandum that was done on January the 20th.
I think we're talking about different things. You're talking about modernizing, well, that too, then that document too. I'm also talking about the executive order though,
Okay.
on racial equity.
Yeah, okay.
And I just don't know if, like, some of these executive orders say that the agency shall have an internal council or a working group or whatever it is. And that might be an appropriate group of agency staff members or officials to identify.
Yeah. Well, OMB still hasn't written the guidance on it yet. It's still developing it.
So this is unfair, but I'm going to do it anyway. Reeve, while we're working on this, can you just do a quick hunt of that to see what if there's anything in the executive order or presidential memorandum about what sort of personnel can look at this?
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to do that.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. I hate to call you out on the spot, but I do appreciate it. All right, Bill Funk.
I'm going to take back my 6 of one and half dozen the others and other social scientists. The way it's to say economists and other social scientists and scientists, all right? It just doesn't read. I mean,
okay.
I take the point that sociologist is a specific kind of expert, but of course this is such as, it's not an exclusive list by any means, but the phraseology, economists and other social scientists and scientists just doesn't read.
I also think there's a fair number of social scientists who would say that we are scientists. So I don't think we want to get into that fight. I'm inclined to go back to sociologists as well, subject to what Reeve finds. Robert Gerard, does the such as cure any heartburn that you might have about using sociologists there?
Yeah, and so does the other agency employees.
Cool. All right. Okay. So the one thing we don't
Aaron,
have.
I'm also seeing a hand raised from Steph Tatham.
All right, Steph, can you please have the floor, but also put it in the chat function, or otherwise I'm not going to be able to see. I can only see 5 people at a time.
I'm so sorry, but EOP won't let me use the chat function, so I cannot do that.
Ah, okay.
But I
sorry.
can wave at you or try and get your attention.
Cough loudly and it might move you up to the 5 visible people.
I was just going
Do your
to
best.
suggest
Thank
that
you. I apologize for that.
Yeah, no problem. I was just going to suggest that in lieu of the phrase distributional equity, that we use the phrase equitable impacts of the regulation, and that's just there are distributional impacts, but there are other types of equitable impacts of regulation. So just trying to broaden that term.
John, does that do the work for you?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on 11? Oh, let's go back to Jonathan's point. Does anybody oppose ongoing learning? All right, hearing none. Jesse Panuccio. Jesse, have the floor.
Yeah, maybe I missed this when we added equitable distribution or equitable impacts, but what exactly is the reasoning for adding terms? I mean, agencies can either promulgate a regulation or not. I don't know if their equity is not really their concern. So what's the, where's that coming from?
I'll let Jonathan or John Kamensky respond. My sense is that was reflecting recent executive and presidential orders. Jonathan, John Kamensky, is that correct?
Yes, that is. I'm putting the link in the chat box.
Well, Aaron, may I comment also?
Yes, please.
Yeah, first, I'm fine with the change of terminology to equitable impact. That's okay. Second, that's been in executive orders. I mean, since at least Executive Order 12866 in 1993 requires agencies to consider distributional equity. And that's been repeated in several other executive orders over time. It's included in OMB Circular A4, I believe. So that's and all this 11D is saying is that those are some of the types of impacts or considerations that agencies should use a variety of staff to help consider.
Jesse, response?
I mean, I guess I'd just say, you know, to the extent we're pointing back to some other order, okay, but it's not really a defined term, so I don't really know what we're suggesting agencies look at.
Maybe this is for Matt or Reeve. What language has ACUS used in other recommendations to reflect the concept?
I would defer to Reeve on that. You know, obviously the Biden, the president's memorandum that I think John put in the chat room, I think uses distributional consequences. That is used elsewhere. I mean, I understand Steph's point. It could say distributional consequences or distributional and other equitable impacts. But I don't know, Reeve, do we have specific terms that we've used in prior ACUS recommendations?
I don't know that we have, no, because I don't know that we've sort of identified that concept specifically. Actually, I think the closest is probably our ongoing recommendation on early public input, where we refer to distributional effects, I think. Is that the term, Leanne, that we use?
I think actually in the preamble for this, if I'm remembering right, we have both distributional impacts and ancillary impacts, and we define them by citing to OMB Circular A4, which does define them.
Well, I would like first, this is now me speaking as a committee member, not as chair. I'm sympathetic to Jesse's point. I would like to have a term that we know what it means. If we use a term in the preamble, there's nice symmetry by using the same term in the recommendation.
Let me check that it's where I think it is. Yeah, okay. We do have footnotes 7 and 8 currently use distributional and ancillary.
Well, then I'm inclined to use that same language if we've already cited it earlier, so we know what we mean. But is that okay with you, John? Is that okay with you, Jesse? So John first, then Jesse.
Yes.
Jesse?
So that term is defined earlier?
Yes.
Correct.
How is it defined?
By citing the language that's in OMB Circular A4. Would you like me to read it?
Or just if I could see it?
Yes,
footnote 7.
It's what's highlighted on the screen. I know that's a little small.
Okay. All right.
Thumbs up from you?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Dave?
Yeah, I kind of stylistic, kind of substantive. This recommendation is under a heading called Ensuring Adequate Resources and Staffing. And here in this paragraph as a backdoor, we're talking about what the elements of a review should include, the substantive elements of a review should be. If the committee believes it should endorse the consideration of these substantive issues, shouldn't that be itself a recommendation on its own? I mean, shouldn't we be saying these are the things you should be considering as part of a periodic review, rather than sliding it into make sure you have the resources to consider these things?
Jim Tosi says time for a vote. Robert Gerard.
I was just going to add to Dave's comment, which is that I have a pre-submitted comment on 12A, which we haven't gotten to yet, which would require precise questions keyed to the factors in Section 5 of EO 12866, one of which is the impact of the regulation on individuals and communities. And I'm wondering if we were to go with something like that, if that would obviate the need to address something substantive in recommendation 11.
So what exactly is your proposal?
My proposal, we haven't gotten to 12 yet, is to change the text of 12A to say, create precise questions to be addressed in the review.
Correct. So what is your proposal for 11? Are you saying we should just drop D altogether?
That if the concern is that the text on distributional and ancillary impacts is getting too much into the substance, when what we're trying to talk about here is what personnel should be involved in the retrospective review, then drop and distributional and ancillary impacts, because we can have language in 12A that addresses that, which is a more substantive section.
Okay, I see Stefan has comment.
Hi, yeah, I'm an economist at the U.S. Coast Guard, and one of the things I was thinking, kind of riffing on Dave's comment, was that I think it would be helpful to have a little bit more of a discussion of some of that substantive bit. And one of the things that hit me when I was reading a little bit earlier up was there was a description of how, you know, we should be considering past rules and things like that. But there's a lot of rules for which there was never an analysis done. And so if you're thinking like, what's the high level sort of rules that have big impacts that we're going to periodically review, you know, there's a lot of rules that were published before, you know, 1970, where there was no substantive requirement to do any real form of analysis. And so if kind of getting back to what sorts of things we want to call out, like distributional impacts might be one. I'd like to also throw in there that just rules that have been around but maybe never even had an economic analysis, that there's kind of a big push element to just assessing like how large those are in terms of scope. I know that's a little different than what's on 11D, and I feel a little bad for kind of commenting, but I figured I would raise that as well.
Okay, all right. Who has a path forward for us here? Let me throw that out to the group. Bill.
Well, I'm not sure it's a path forward, but I don't see any problem with saying distributional and ancillary impacts here and then addressing it specifically in recommendation 12. This is aiming at a different thing. Putting distributional and ancillary impacts here is sort of to just describe why you might have a sociologist as opposed to an engineer. I think that's the reason for it to be there. And I mean, I think we're spending too much time on just on this thing, which is just saying, hey, get some different people there. Multidisciplinary. That's the whole purpose of D. Is this is multidisciplinary. C is all about just you get experts, right? Not just the staff people, but you get some experts in. So they're aiming at little different things. There's some overlap, and there'll be overlap later with 12. But I don't see any particular problem with that.
Okay, I'm going to speak now as committee member, not chair. I agree with Bill on that. I don't think we're saying anything inconsistent if we want to say something else in 12. I think we're just talking about things that you should consider, and I don't think we're backdooring anything substantive in here. That's my sense as, again, committee member, not chair. I think the best way to move forward here is if we were a room, I would do a straw poll. We're going to do something like a straw poll here. So I like 11 as it is. For folks who have voting rights, is there anybody who would vote against 11 as it is?
As it is with the changes we've written in
correct,
there?
as it appears on the screen. Is there anybody who would say, no, I would vote against this? If so, we'll go back and we'll spend some more time on it. Otherwise, I think we'll keep this and move on. So I'm going to throw out there as a straw poll, if you have voting privileges, is there anybody who would vote no or has serious concerns about 11 as it is? Okay, I'm looking at the chat function. Let me see if I can see the people, if there's any hands raised or anything. Okay, seeing none, that's what we're going to do. I understand your point, Dave. I'm not trying to dismiss it, but I don't think that we're doing that. And if we are, I apologize. I don't think we are. All right.
No, certainly. If 12 is going to get the treatment here that we're talking about, then yeah, this is simply a preface to the substance that we're going to talk about in 12.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. All right, let's move on to 12 then. Here we have some pre-submitted comments. Leanne?
Sure. So on the text before the lettered list, we have a comment from Richard Morgenstern and Art Frass, who say, we believe that the best approach for achieving this objective is to include this discussion as part of the agency rulemaking and to incorporate the required instruments and process within the rule.
Okay. I'm trying to understand what that means. We believe the best approach for this objective, being create learning agendas, is to include as part of the rulemaking and incorporate required within the rule.
I think they're saying all this information should be in the rulemaking, but I'm not 100% sure.
Jonathan, can I ask you for your reaction? Or maybe Lori, I haven't asked you yet. I'll ask Lori first.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm as stumped as you guys are, exactly what they're trying to get at here.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. Okay. Jonathan?
My reaction was, what we're trying to suggest in this whole set of recommendations is how agencies should do periodic reviews of their rules. Some of this may not have been in the original rule, which might have been adopted years or decades ago. So, so perhaps what Dick Morgenstern and Art Frost are suggesting is that ideally the agency would prospectively in a new rulemaking call for such information in its subsequent periodic reviews, but that could be a good idea, but that doesn't cover the whole arena of all of the periodic reviews that these recommendations are addressing.
Okay, unless anybody speaks up in this defense, I'm inclined to respectfully dismiss the comment. Looking at the chat feature, hearing none, dismissed.
All right. The next one is from Robert Gerard, so he'll be able to speak to this. I may just read the beginning bit. I think we should amend this text since regulatory review fulfills the Evidence Act's requirements only if the questions to be addressed and the methods to be followed are actually integrated into the agency's learning agenda and annual evaluation plan. And he has some proposed language.
Okay, then can you read the proposed language too?
Consistent with the Evidence Act, agencies should incorporate periodic retrospective reviews in their learning agendas and annual evaluation plans and should undertake and document the following activities. See if I can put that in.
Yeah, please do. And while you're doing that, Robert, do you want to explain?
Sure. So it's really a change of emphasis. As currently drafted, the text states that to satisfy the Evidence Act's requirements related to learning agendas and annual evaluation plans, agencies should do certain things with their retrospective reviews. But I think it would be more accurate to have language requiring the learning plans and the evaluation plans actually incorporate the retrospective review. Because, for example, OMB's 2019 memo on the Evidence Act states that learning agendas is where agencies identify the short-term and long-term strategic questions about their missions, including how regulations function both individually and in combination. So at least under the OMB guidance, it appears to require retrospective reviews to be incorporated in the learning agendas, and then the evaluation plans are an explanation of how, taken together, the agency's planned evaluation activities help to answer those priority evaluation questions that are in the learning agenda.
Jonathan, then Bill.
I wanted to say that I agree with at least one key point, and maybe all of what Robert is proposing here, because as Robert also pointed out in another point in his submitted comments, the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Act itself does not use the phrase learning agenda. That's used in OMB memoranda or OMB guidance, such as the one that's cited here, M1923, which uses the phrase learning agenda many, many times, which has a footnote saying that that phrase learning agenda corresponds to the evaluation plans in the statute. So rather than saying, to satisfy the requirements of the Evidence-Based Policy Act, it's better to say, as Robert has said, consistent with the Evidence Act or subject to or following the OMB guidelines or something like that, because that's where the phrase learning agendas comes from.
Bill Funk.
I wanted to say I support Robert's reformulation. I just think it's a better way of saying it.
I like it as well. Does anybody have substantive concerns with it? It sounds like it's Jonathan. Jonathan Wiener. Sounds like you're not no substantive concerns.
No, I'm fine with it. Just one quick question, maybe for Leanne. Have we already defined the Evidence Act earlier in this set of recommendations?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but I think your very good point about the footnote 13 is on the preamble. And so it does come up in the preamble, which we haven't talked about as a committee yet, but I think it does come up earlier in the document.
Yeah, I was just asking because number 12, recommendation 12 here just refers to the Evidence Act. So I was hoping it was cited earlier. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Unless I hear anybody push back, we're going to adopt Robert's language. So I'm going to count to 3, going, 1, 2, 3, gone. We have accepted it. Thank you, Robert. Let's move on to part A.
Okay, so we have 2 comments here.
Okay.
The first one is again from Richard Morgenstern and Art Frass, who say we endorse the importance of setting out precise questions to be addressed by the review, such as examining the nature and distribution of the benefits and costs, developing a benefit cost analysis with comparison to a counterfactual scenario, or considering effects on a particular sector of the economy. In our view, it would be grossly inadequate if the inquiry were to focus solely on how frequently regulations should be reviewed. And then the second comment is from Jonathan Doles and DOT, and we do have somebody who's serving as his alternate on the call. And they raised whether a rule maximizes net benefits is not a precise question, maximum relative to what, suggest deleting.
Okay, so again, let's look at the first comment. I'm trying to understand how that fits in here. It's a such as. I don't think we're saying anything contrary to that. Does anybody want to defend or be the advocate here for the Morgenstein-Franz comment? Okay, well, then again, hearing none, with all respect, I don't think we're saying anything contrary to that. So I say delete.
Okay.
Okay, we say we have a representative from DOT here.
Yeah, I think Deborah Aiken is on the line. Last I checked.
Hey, Deborah, are you on the line?
Yeah, yes, I'm on the line.
Do you want
Actually,
to?
I ghost wrote that.
Okay, great.
How'd
you
No, I just thought, I mean, I have done this stuff for a really long time and you're really never maximizing net benefits. So I just thought it sounded a little jargony. You could phrase it differently. Whether benefits and costs were considered adequately. I just objected to the idea that, you would, because the answer to that's always no. Or I could find a way to make it no.
Okay. Thoughts, reactions, comments to changing the language to benefits and costs were addressed adequately. This might be a question for staff. I don't think we're the first committee to use maximizes net benefits. So if it's the language that we've used before, that cuts in favor of retaining it just for consistency's sake. But if we really haven't used it one way or the other, I don't see any real harm in saying adequately addressed rather than maximize. Okay, Robert Gerard says he has a comment response to this. So I realize I'm jumping in front of the line. I'm gonna let Robert have it first, and then Bill, and then Jonathan. Robert.
Sure, I was just going to say that my pre-submitted comment was a response to this. I thought that it would be unnecessary to refer to maximizing net benefits if we were to broaden the reference. Maximizing net benefits is one of the principles of regulation that's listed in section 1 of EO 12866. So I think it's perfectly appropriate, but it's not the only thing. Section 5 of the executive order specifically lists the goals of periodic retrospective review of significant rules. The principles of regulation are included in that list, but it also includes reducing regulatory burden on individuals, communities, and families, which is the distributional equity issue, whether regulations have become unjustified or unnecessary, whether regulations are compatible with each other, whether they're consistent with the president's priorities, and so on. So my pre-submitted proposal was to stop after the first comma. So create precise questions to be addressed by the review, and then to add keyed to the factors set forth in section 5 of Executive Order 12866 for periodic review of existing significant regulations. Since that would get to the maximizing
I apologize, Robert, if I missed that comment on your document. Could you either drop in the chat for me that exact language or repeat it slowly so I might type it?
Okay, sure. So after the existing create precise questions to be addressed by the review, comma, strike the rest of the text and say, keyed to the factors.
Yeah.
Set forth in section 5 of Executive Order 12866 for periodic review of existing significant regulations. So for periodic review of existing significant regulations, and then strike the rest.
I'm afraid Leanne might be frozen. Let's give her a minute to come back. And she's back.
I'm so sorry. My internet is choosing today to be a little bit finicky. Hopefully that will be the last time. We're back. I got partway through Roberts.
Okay, so of existing significant regulations.
Okay. And
then striking the rest.
Okay.
Okay, Bill Funk.
Well, I generally supported, was going to support Robert's proposal here. I'm not sure about the language, and I'm not sure whether or not how frequently it should be reviewed, or how, is that in the executive order as well? How frequently it should be reviewed?
No, actually, I don't think it is.
So I was thinking that should be there.
Yeah, that was my instinct. Again, this is me speaking as committee member, not committee chair. I think that I like bringing 12866 here because that way we're incorporating by reference an entire body of information. But I also think we want to include how frequently it should be reviewed. And I don't think we need how it affects a particular sector of the economy, but I think we should include and how frequently it should be reviewed. Which I don't think that concept is in 1286.
Yeah, I'm looking at section 5A of the executive order right now. It doesn't include it.
So Robert, is that a helpful amendment?
Yes, I think it is.
Okay, now let me bring back my chat function here. Okay, looking. The language okay, Stefan says the language as it reads only applies to significant regulations. I don't think it does that. I think it's saying those are the factors that we're identifying. I don't think we're saying it only apply that to significant regulations here. Is that correct, Robert?
Yeah, I think the executive order uses these factors just for review of significant regulations, but the intent of what I was trying to get to here is that they would be useful factors for retrospective review of any regulations.
Correct. That's how I read it. Okay. Does anybody want to push back at this change from Robert that we now have on the screen for A? Again, if I was in the room, I would look at everybody's face. I can't do that now. So, if you have a pushback, please say comment in the chat function.
There's just phraseology problem, how frequently it should be reviewed. The it doesn't refer to anything. I don't know. We have regulations plural, how frequently should be. Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm gonna go with A here. Again, it's the speak up, or I'm gonna assume consensus. So going, gone. Okay, thank you so much, Robert. That was really helpful. Oh, DOT, Deborah, does that do it for you? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you out.
No, I'm cool with that.
Great, thank you. All right, let's move on to B. Do we have any comments on B? It doesn't look like we have any comments. Robert, did you have a comment on B that got lost?
No, I didn't have any more comments on 12.
Okay, great. So B, describe the information needed to conduct reviews of the regulation, including whether the agency will undertake new information collection requests or if it will use existing information. Does anybody have thoughts, comments, concerns, reactions to B? Okay, hearing none, let's go to C. And here we have, Leanne, can you explain what's going on with C?
Yes, although I apologize, they're apparently mowing with like 4 lawnmowers outside my apartment. So if that shows up in the background, I'm sorry. So the initial comment on this was again from DOT, which we now know was secretly Deborah, and says recommend deleting randomized control trials or quasi-experimental methods as examples because these methods are probably the least likely to be used in a retrospective review. For example, a regulation typically applies to units, e.g. the entire US, for which randomized and assigning control groups is not possible, perhaps combined with previous recommendation on information, as the information collected will determine the method. I also think it's possible that this comment I have here underneath is in fact, this is in fact the lost comment from Robert, which should have been 2 earlier.
Okay, so Deborah, does your comment bubble speak for itself or do you want to add anything to it?
No, that's just, I thought those were 2 kind of odd techniques. I've never in my regulatory and analysis experience used either of those methods.
Okay, so I'm going to take my turn in the comment, speaking now as a committee member, not as chair, just my turn in the comment bubble. I agree with Deborah there. I am somewhat skeptical of use of randomized controlled trials and quasi-experimental methods. I know that we had a recommendation about that. And so I recognize I might be outvoted on this, but I am sympathetic to saying, I don't want to pick those 2 in particular as the ones that we want to recommend. If we want to recommend those maybe in a list of others or something, but certainly not just as those as the only 2. Robert Gerard.
Yeah, I like omitting it as well, but I hesitate a little because I'm not an expert on the Evidence Act or OMB's guidance. I was wondering if maybe Stephanie might have some insight on whether the requirements for evaluation plans indicate that certain kinds of methodologies ought to be used.
Stephanie, I'm gonna ask you out of order, then I'll let Bill have the floor. Stephanie, do you have any reaction to that?
You know, I don't have specific knowledge of what our requirements are in this area. My assumption is that we would be relatively flexible here, and I don't have concerns personally with the stricken language. I'd be happy to look at our sort of methodological discussion, but I think generally we give agencies flexibility in developing what would be appropriate for the particular inquiry being undertaken.
Bill and then Jennifer. Welcome, Jennifer.
Before I'd be happy with deleting this language, I'd like to know who put it in and why. Maybe Jonathan has an answer for that. I mean, somebody put it there and they must have had a reason. I just would like to know what it was.
Jennifer.
Yeah, hi. So I want to, I guess, sound out the argument for it. And maybe, I don't know, Jonathan, whoever put this thing, maybe you should start by saying why it's in there. But I actually think it's really important to have this language in there. I think the gold standard, for conducting retrospective reviews should be something approaching a randomized controlled trial. Now, recognition that that's often impossible. I think the phrase quasi-experimental methods gets at that because, in theory, we really do want to have a sense of, a control and then like kind of what the change, that is the regulation, the impacts that it actually had. And the only really valid way to measure that is through one of these 2 methods. So I don't frankly understand the opposition to these terms. So I'd like to see them in there in some form.
Jonathan.
You calling on me, Aaron?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I'm not sure if Laurie and I put this in our report draft recommendations. I I would note, as you did, Aaron, I think that there is a prior ACUS report on by Zachary Gubler on this point of use of RCTs, randomized controlled trials, or quasi-experimental methods. And there was a related ACUS recommendation, which I think was, as I recall, was combined with another report that maybe Carrie Colonese or perhaps others had prepared. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. But my reaction also is that this point 12D should be open to the range of methods for assessing the impacts that would be considered under the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Act and the OMB guidelines, because that's what number 12 is talking about more broadly. So I wouldn't limit it to these. I know it said such as, but that gives some emphasis to these methods.
John Kamensky.
What might be a phrasing of this is reflected in OMB guidance, and you may want to say something such as federal program evaluation standards. And that is defined in OMB M20-12, which is the implementation guidance for the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. And it covers program evaluation standards and practices, which is broader than specific things like RCTs.
John, could you repeat for me really quickly the name and number of that memo?
Certainly. It's M20-12. And I can provide more detail if you want. I'll send you the link.
So this is not fair, but I'm not fair. So John or somebody who's familiar with this, I confess I am not. Does that cover the concern that Jennifer was raising about how we might want randomized control trials or quasi-experimental type methods? Is that included in the federal program evaluation?
Yeah, this is the broader framework for evaluation standards, and a subset of that is RCTs and things. So this is, I think this is probably more ecumenical.
Okay, Jennifer, does that do the trick for you?
Yeah, if it includes it, sure.
Okay, well, how about this? We're going to have a vote.
Aaron, Steph has her hand up and might have something useful to contribute here.
I'm sorry, Steph. Thank you. Please have the floor.
No, I'm so sorry, I can't chat you. I checked with our Evidence Act expert, and she confirmed that we don't prioritize any particular methodology. We just, want it to be fit for purpose. And she did tease that we do have some forthcoming guidance on this, so it's not something that we would be able to provide a link to right now, but perhaps by the time of the plenary session, we can offer an amendment that would provide, more recent guidance on the type of evidence that might be considered, or the use of methods in the learning agenda and agency evidence plans.
So Stephanie, right now, I hate to put you on the spot, but does such as federal program evaluation standards, does that cause you any heartburn?
None at all. It sounds great for the reasons described and suggesting it.
Perfect, thank you. All right, does anybody have anything else to add about 12C? Hearing none, 12D. We have no pre-submitted comments on 12D, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody have any reactions, positive or negative, to D? Or let's focus on negative, I guess. Any negative reactions to D? Okay. E. Describe how we'll use the review results to inform policymaking, including by strengthening, maintaining, or otherwise modifying the regulation. We have no pre-submitted comments. Does anybody have any negative reactions to E? Okay, hearing none. On 12 altogether.
Aaron, Steph's got her hand up.
Okay, thank you, Steph. how about I give you a license, Steph? You can just interrupt whenever you want because your value,
I'm so sorry.
super value added. I just can't see you, and I'm very sorry about that.
I guess I was just wondering what was intended by the last clause, like the work that is doing. So is the idea that an agency in its learning agenda would say specifically, we're going to use the review results to maintain our regulation or to modify our regulation? Because it seems like if you're specifying, what you're going to be doing with the regulation, that might be presupposing the outcome of the research that you're doing. So, we'd want, including for, deliberative reasons, to avoid that. But I do think it's useful to describe how you will use the review results in informing your policy making. So I don't know, I guess I would make a friendly suggestion to strike everything after the comma. But if there's a good reason to include it, I'd love to hear it.
I confess I am not an expert on this. Does anybody want to defend keeping the last clause after the comma? I'm just throwing it open to the group here.
I would.
All right, Bill, take the floor.
I mean, I think it's as including. So the idea is that what are you going to do with the results of the study? You're just going to file it away, or are you going to do something with it? And if you're going to do something with it, what might you do with it? Well, you might strengthen, maintain, or otherwise modify the regulation. So I mean, I think it's helpful as to what you might do, and I think it's worthwhile for the agency to say, well, we're not just going to file it away. We're going to do something with it, and this is what we might do. We don't know ahead of time whether we'll strengthen it or repeal it, but we'll do one of those things.
Steph, a reaction?
I guess if an agency is going to say that, we're going to do this set of things with the information, but if it, Bill, I guess the question is it so specific that it would say we're going to maintain the regulation going into the review of the regulation? Because it seems like that would be premature. So I'm wondering if there's
I agree. It wouldn't say we are going to maintain the regulation as a result of our review, because we don't know what the review will say. But I think it's worthwhile to say that we will do something to the regulation if the results of the review suggest we should do something. We aren't just going to file and forget it.
Isn't that implicit, Bill, in the describe how we'll use the review? I mean, filing it away is not using anything. Regardless, Jennifer.
Yeah, I just want to register my agreement with you, Aaron and Steph. I mean, I think that's all included if you delete the language. And on top of that, I think deleting the language perhaps also opens up like other possibilities. Like, who knows, maybe the agency wants to rewrite its guidance or approach enforcement differently because it finds that the retrospective review reveals that it wasn't, the rule itself wasn't resulting in enough compliance and so on. So, why tie their hands? And I think deleting the language.
I withdraw my defense.
Sorry?
I withdraw my defense.
You withdraw your defense. Okay, does anybody else want to jump in on this one? Otherwise, I'm inclined to delete after the comma. Again, I can't see anybody, so if there's anybody frantically waving your hands, just speak up. Going, gone. All right, we are done with 12, and now we're on to 13, which I think is our last one. We have some pre-submitted comments here. Can you explain what's going on?
We have 2 left, Aaron.
We have 2 left? All right. This is great.
Yeah,
okay.
we have 13 and 14.
All right, take it.
All right, so the question was, who do we want to designate this responsibility to? We have one comment from the Institute for Policy Integrity that suggested OIRA might be interested in doing that, as did Richard Morgenstern and Art Frass. I suspect we want Steph to speak to that question.
Yes, please, Steph.
Yes, indeed. I took this back and we are interested in being the body that would do that. Our one request is that you include a feasibility caveat because of course it's subject to limitations on resources. So if you think we should do it, we're happy to accept the recommendation, but our ability to implement it will be somewhat constrained by resources in the short term. So,
Sure.
If you could include a feasibility qualifier, we'd appreciate it. But if the conference chooses not to do that, we understand as well.
Okay, so we have two steps of analysis here. One, does the committee agree that OMB would be a good body to do this? And assuming that we agree with that, do we agree with the feasibility language thrown in there?
Yeah, and we prefer Office of Information Regulatory Affairs to OMB because within OMB we would be the entity.
Cool. All right, so let's do the questions sequentially. Does anybody oppose having OIRA lead the interagency coordination on this? After they volunteer to do it, it's hard to say no to a volunteer. Thank you.
Aaron, just a really quick thought on that. I don't oppose it at all, but just to kind of raise it, what about the independent agencies? Like, do we think that there should be like another body? Are we worried? Like, we want them to obviously engage in periodic retrospective review, do we?
So here's the question, maybe I'm gonna ask you, Jennifer, or somebody else who has more knowledge of how OIRA works with coordination. So do the independent agencies not even work on voluntary coordination with OIRA?
I'll let Steph or others talk, but of course, I think they can voluntarily. But the way that it's worded, there could be the issue that, they might bristle if OIRA, convenes them and wants them to participate. But even apart from that, I could imagine, I was just thinking of like other bodies like FSOC or something like that, that might also have like an interagency kind of role with like the banking agencies that might also want to convene them to engage in periodic retrospective review.
Okay, so can you think about, well, I get some more comments. Can you think about some proposed language to fit in there, Jennifer?
Well, here's just a quick thought. You could say something like, bodies or entities with interagency responsibilities, such as the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs. And that, I don't know, maybe that would just leave open the identification of other bodies for other groups of agencies.
Okay, John Kaminsky.
I'm not a lawyer, but if sounded very vague, like, is there a stronger word than if? I don't know whether where or when or something like that.
We often use as feasible.
Oh, okay, there we go.
All right, so now, does anybody have any comments to Jennifer's point? To broaden it out to make OIRA such as rather than the sole identified. I don't have any, that doesn't give me any heartburn, but it looks like, okay, Bill Funk has a comment, but not on that. So on that comment, does anybody have any problem with the language that Jennifer has proposed? Stephanie, I'll ask you one more, I guess. I assume you don't have a problem with that?
No concerns at all. We typically, ACUS has the Council of Independent Regulatory Agencies. We don't have a formal working group, to my knowledge, that includes those agencies, although we do work with them under the PRA and with respect to statistical and science policy. So I think, we'd be fine with other agencies doing this as well if they have a more direct connection to some of those agencies.
Cool. All right, then hearing none, we'll go with that. Bill Funk, you have a comment on something else?
I have a comment on the as feasible.
Okay.
I don't see why we should have it in there. Otherwise, we should put as feasible in every one of our recommendations, right? Agency should, as feasible, do this. Agency should do that as feasible. I mean, of course it's as feasible. And indeed, without the as feasible, it's even a grounds for whatever agency was going to do this to go ask for funds to do it. So as feasible would suggest they should do it on their existing funds. I just think it's unnecessary, and as much as it's something you would say about every one of our recommendations.
That is certainly true. We could say that about every recommendation because by definition, recommendations are recommendations. So do it if you can. But I do know I've been here 4 years. We sometimes do include as feasibles. If we want to, specifically identify this as a particular area where we've thought about it as a committee as above and beyond the ordinary, everything's a recommendation. So I don't have a problem with as feasible there, especially because, OIRA has generously offered to help do this. But now I'm speaking as a committee member, not as a chair. Anybody other have reactions to as feasible? How about Jim Tozy? We haven't heard from Jim for a while. What do you think about as feasible, Jim?
I think I guess the comment I have is on you wrote it's just guidance. I mean, it's just a recommendation when Bill said it's feasible. My view is that ACUS recommendation should be interpreted as the same way as the legal profession interprets guidance. It's binding unless you get a policy person to agree with it. And if you agree with that, then you would argue that the feasibility language may mean something.
Well, if that's the case, then I think we should keep it as feasible because.
Yes, I mean, because, all professions have a thing. The economics profession has a thing called Kaldor-Hicks, where they try to show some Pareto optimum works, and one person wrote it, and we all wrote it, and it's a sinking ship. And I think the legal views of interpretation of guidance I disagree with, but nonetheless, it sticks. And right now, ACUS has said, and all the legal profession has said, is that agency guidance is binding on lower level officials unless you convince the policy people to do it. So I take this as guidance, ACUS is guidance. So I think it's binding unless it should be changed. Therefore, I would say that feasible should stay in the text.
All right, Dave, I see your comment in the chat. Because I want to keep the chat clear of substantive points, can you throw it out there for the group as just a regular comment to the group, and then we'll discuss it from there?
Well, certainly, I compliment Jim on his elevation of ACUS to a presidential policymaking body. I think it is reasonable to read ACUS recommendations as always being solely recommendations and not binding guidance on any agency. That said, I agree that if feasible is one of those wiggle words that you use when you don't actually understand why an agency might not want to do it. And so my question is whether there is an aspect of feasibility that is unique to this particular recommendation that would not apply to any of the other recommendations. And if that's the case, then that aspect of feasibility might be worthwhile mentioning. Otherwise, I would say that the verbiage as feasible is superfluous.
So my understanding, I agree with that. I think that's a helpful way of framing it. I think that what makes this unique is we are going above and beyond the call in that we're asking one agency to take the lead in an interagency coordination process. So we're not just saying for agencies, as you go forth and do the periodic review that you're already supposed to do it this way. We're saying, and by the way, here's something extra that we would like somebody to do. And the entity that has volunteered to help do that has asked for, softly, politely asked for it as feasible. So for me, I feel it would be equally polite for us to give them what they politely asked for. That's why I'm in favor of an as feasible. I don't feel super strongly about it because I do think that almost everything we say is, essentially everything we say is a recommendation. But that's why I think it makes us unique. But again, that's me as council member, as committee member, not committee chair.
And
Does anybody have any other thoughts on this?
Aaron, and what you say is entirely consistent with any number of past ACUS recommendations when we're asking agencies or some other body to put in place some institutional arrangement that might, require, as probably will, some resources that they may not have, have at their disposal.
So one thing I would say, this is Steph with ORI to speak to this, is just that, we do a lot on our plate right now coming out of a presidential transition and with the variety of Biden administration initiatives. So we're currently undertaking a regulatory modernization project. We have a significant role in the administration's equity initiatives. And those are really the reasons that we requested the as feasible language, is because this is, we think, a very important function. We really love periodic retrospective review. We really value it, and we'd love to have a role here. But in terms of the queue, we have to prioritize the current administration's priorities. And so to the extent that those two can be linked, all the better. But it's just sort of in the pecking order. We do already have regulatory modernization underway and equity initiatives underway.
I'm convinced.
Okay, Bill Funk is convinced. Anybody else want to push back against feasible?
I would suggest an alternative wording then, should consider regularly convening rather than as feasible. That would just be my suggestion.
You would change it to consider as opposed to feasible?
Yeah.
All right, does anybody agree with Robert on that? Not Robert, Dave, I'm sorry. Okay, does anybody agree with Dave on that? If so, speak up.
Regularly convening.
Should consider regularly convening. I still think we would have the word as feasible in there. I guess I would prefer as feasible to consider, but
I would suggest one or the other. I wouldn't do.
Yeah, I agree. It should be one or the other. Who hasn't? This is where I wish Eloise was here. Eloise is the best at this. Let me see. Does anyone else want to play Eloise for us? John Cooney, I'm going to call on you. What do you think? Should we go with consider or feasible? You're on mute.
Sorry, I prefer feasible for the reason that it recognizes the problems that both the convening agency and the responding agencies have. It's one thing if it's an executive order backed up by the White House and say you shall convene regularly, but OMB is a busy agency that's going to be asking people to come together, and they're going to be busy and having, as anybody who's ever tried to plan interagency discussion groups within the White House knows, it's just phenomenally difficult to get everybody there unless you have some kind of velvet fist behind the request. So I like as feasible because it recognizes that there's nothing here that can be done, as a matter of an order. It's if the people can, if OMB has the time and important agencies can make it on time, convene groups to discuss these important topics.
Thank you, John. I do feel like I'm cold calling on people right now. That's great. Okay. All right. I like feasible. John liked feasible. I'm going to ask the group if there's anybody other than Dave that would prefer consider to feasible. If not, we're going to go with feasible. All right, going, gone. We're going to go with feasible. All right, thank you, everybody. All right, we are on number 14. I would like to get number 14 done. Then we can go through the preamble and then we can give it a vote. We've got half an hour. Let's see if we can make this work. I think we can. All right, Leanne, what's our comment? You're on mute.
Good catch. Okay. This one's from the Institute for Policy Integrity and says agencies should think about how to craft their rulemaking to facilitate future retrospective reviews, setting clear metrics and clear processes for collecting the information necessary to conduct future reviews should be a part of agencies' rulemakings, and ACUS's recommendations should so advise. ACUS should advise OIRA and agencies to work together to balance the benefits and costs of collecting the information necessary to conduct periodic reviews.
Okay. All right. Jonathan or Lori, do you have any reaction to that?
I guess I don't disagree with any of it, but I feel like we talked about that in some earlier recommendations on the data necessary. I don't know, they're all sort of blurring together now a little bit, but I feel like we talked about some of this in earlier recommendations.
We've got a Paperwork Reduction Act bit that you might be thinking of.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Okay.
So, and
I'm
many of
sorry,
the
Laura.
other, sorry, many of the other points are also embedded above a little bit, like, or, you know, implicitly in incorporating them into their learning agendas and other things. I don't know. Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I also, my reaction also was, didn't we cover this already? That is agreeing with the spirit of this comment that agencies should plan ahead, that when they adopt a new rule, they should plan for facilitating future retrospective reviews, including for data collection. And that may involve information requests that have to go through OIRA. So you just noted number 10 was on the information requests, working with OIRA.
On the Paperwork Reduction Act, yeah.
Right. Because one of the provisions, one part of the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1980 as amended involves the I in OIRA, information requests. That's what I was referring to. But I think there's some other elements in this comment from the Institute for Policy Integrity, which I also thought we had already covered in the earlier recommendations about agencies planning ahead for periodic review. But maybe we need to just quickly check back on, you know, recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that.
Bill Funk.
Well, whatever we do, it can't be in number 14 because that's under interagency coordination is the title for these two recommendations. And this suggestion from the Institute for Policy Studies has nothing to do with interagency coordination. It's just a wholly new idea, which is that when you do a rulemaking, you should consider that you will be doing retrospective review of it, and therefore craft your rule in your rulemaking so as to facilitate that retrospective review. And I don't know if that's anywhere else in our recommendations. It's a worthwhile idea. It may be in a prior ACUS recommendation.
I guess that's a question. I'm not being fair to anybody at this point. Reeve, is that covered in the 2014 recommendation?
Sorry, Aaron, could you or Bill restate the question briefly? Is which component?
The concept that when you promulgate a rule, you should promulgate it with an eye towards retrospective review as part of the life cycle of the rule.
I think the answer is yes. Let me double check, but I think that was sort of the idea is that, yeah, you plan for retrospective review when promulgating the rule in the first place.
That's my understanding too.
I think it's in here too, Aaron, somewhere.
I thought it was certainly in here, or at least a version of that, not as strong as Bill just stated it, which I thought was helpful, but I thought that was what we did in 2014. So let's let Reeve look at that. If that's already included, then I'm inclined just to disregard this comment bubble because we don't need to say the same thing 5 times, just 3 times. While Reeve is checking on that, I say let's delete the comment from here. It certainly doesn't go here at 14, and we'll make sure that that idea is included either in the 2014 or in the first suite of recommendations. Okay, while we're doing that, does anyone else have any reactions to 14 or the interagency coordination suite? If not, I think there's a few more pre-submitted changes to the recommendations between the second and third meeting. Is that correct, Leanne? Or am I wrong? I saw some comment bubbles to the left. I want to make sure that.
Oh, I do. I think we wanted to go back and talk about 4E at the very least. And I think the other things that are in comment bubbles are my
Well, Robert
research.
says he has one on 6.
Oh, you're correct. Both he caught a typo and there was a language suggestion change from him.
Okay, so let's look at 4E. Well, she's looking at 4E. Can you just share with me, with the group, what you just shared with me privately?
Sure. Yeah. So I found it in 2014-5. It indeed, in fact, maybe it's easiest if I just read the language. When formulating new regulations, agencies should, where appropriate, given available resources, priorities, authorizing statutes, nature of the regulation, and impact of the regulation, establish a framework for reassessing the regulation in the future, and should consider including portions of the framework in the rules preamble.
Perfect. All right. Unless anybody wants to push back, I'm inclined to say that's sufficient to resolve the comment.
Aaron, may I make a small point?
Sure.
Maybe we should just double check to make sure that we've cited 2014-5 someplace in these recommendations.
Oh, we definitely have.
Yeah, I know we cited it in the report, but just to be sure we cite it in the recommendations.
It might be the literal first citation in the, no, it's the second citation in the document.
All right, perfect. Okay, let's look at 4E now.
All right, so the question here is we tentatively left requests for waivers and exemptions in both D and E because there were overlaps in those concepts and we hadn't decided whether or not that was okay.
Okay. And who's the who issued that comment?
That's not a, that's just, you asked me to flag it for the committee
Okay.
review when we got
So I
back.
did.
Yeah.
All right. We should review this again to see if it correctly captures intent. Request for waiver exemptions now. Okay. I'm throwing it out to the group. What do we think? Comment, Dave.
Yeah, I think my original thought was that the request for waivers or exemptions more closely fit into E. Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry, my screens just went black. So I got.
Oh, did we lose him?
All right, we have lost him.
Yes, I'm sorry, Zoom just
You're back.
restarted on its own.
Okay.
D seemed to be an issue of the public at large's engagement, and E seemed to be an issue of the regulated entities. So it seemed that requests for waivers or exemptions more closely fit into paragraph E.
Okay. I guess I'm speaking for myself. I kind of like it in both, but I hear what you're saying. Does anybody else have a view on this? Bill Funk.
I think I'm with you, which is, I mean, I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I think it works in both places. D is about the amount of public interest in it, and the number of requests for waivers or exemptions might be an evidence of that. But you could take it out, and I don't think it would make a whole lot of difference. These are not exclusive ways of determining it.
Anybody else? All right, so here's the problem. I feel like a bully sometimes because I can't read the room. So I can't know if what my preference is just my preference or if it's the sense of the room. So how about this? And again, I realize I'm being a bully here. If there's anybody who wants requests for waivers or exemptions to be taken out of D, speak up now. So I know it's just not me just being a bully, but that's going to be the default as we keep it in D and E. So, Anne, please, Anne, take the floor.
I think it's fine in both. I thought of D as more external facing and E as more internal for sort of in terms of the agency's perspective, but as kind of our earlier discussion on yet another aspect, that there's obviously overlap between them.
Okay, so you're okay with it as is? And
sorry, I was nodding my head. Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
Sometimes
right.
you want the cues on video versus auditory, so I was doing the other.
Unfortunately, I can't see you on my 5 people that I'm looking at. So I need like a gigantic screen, like 5 times bigger, so I can see everybody at once. All right. I'm going to say, unless anybody speaks up, we're going to keep it as it is because I think it's useful, and I don't think anyone on the voting members are going to push back. Sorry to override you on that one, Dave. Hopefully it's okay.
Get overridden. That's perfectly fine.
All right, thank you. All right, what else do we have? We have the pre-submitted comment from Robert Gerard on 6.
We also have something on 5. I'm so sorry, Aaron.
What do we have on 5?
You had asked last time about whether we wanted to keep creating online discussion forums designed to solicit feedback, because you were concerned about that being us treading into new territory.
Correct.
I looked at this. It's language coming directly from Jonathan and Lori's report, but we do have something a little bit similar in our recommendation 2013-5, where we refer to agencies facilitating social media discussions.
I'm debating if I should say it. I'm going to say this. I'm going to be a bully here, so push back. My proposal is to delete that language because I don't think we have, as AGUS has gone through what exactly that looks like, and that strikes me as new and potentially confusing. But I'm fine being overridden. I like it in the report. I think it's useful in the report. I don't think AGUS has said anything about this before, like in the sense of what an online discussion forum would look like. And I don't want this recommendation to be that. Bill and then Ann? Or is this not related to that? These earlier comments?
Mine was earlier.
Okay, does anybody want to defend keeping online discussion forums in this recommendation? I feel like I am being a bully here because that's my view and I have the floor, but I feel pretty strongly about that. But I'm also like to listen to hear other people's thoughts, make sure that we're all on board. Maybe Matt, can I ask you, Matt, what is your reaction as just a knowledgeable observer of what we've done? Have we done this before in an ACUS recommendation, talked about online discussion forums?
I'm not aware of any, which isn't to say that you can't do it here.
I agree with that. But that I don't think
no,
that's
the answer is no, I'm not aware of any. I don't know if Reeve is, but I'm not aware of any.
So on that understanding, is there anybody who wants to push back and say, no, let's keep it here? All right, hearing none, let's delete it. Sorry, I hate being a bully. Okay, 6.
All right, so there's 2 things here. One of which I don't know if we'll need to address. You had asked whether there was a comment from the Institute for Policy Integrity asking whether we address regulatory plans elsewhere. This comment bubble is just noting that we do directly address that in recommendation 95.3. And I believe that you had said in the last committee meeting that we had all agreed if it's addressed in another ACUS recommendation, we don't need it here.
Thumbs up.
Okay. And then Robert he caught a typo earlier in this recommendation, which I just put in and didn't leave as a track change. He also proposed a change to this last sentence. Instead of saying and should consider including them within the Federal Register, suggested the language and should consider publishing them in the Federal Register.
Robert, is that just stylistic or is that a substantive point?
It's stylistic. It reflects what agencies actually do. They publish things in the Federal Register. They don't include them within it.
Okay, does anybody want to push back on that? Okay, accepted.
Great. I think we have two more, which is both of which are just flagging that I put in language as requested that tracks with previous ACUS recommendations. So we had a comment about the fact that agencies should put documents in easy to find places on websites. And I chose, of the options we had from previous ACUS recommendations, the language in a prominent, easy to find place on the portion of their websites dealing with rulemaking matters. I have in the comment bubble a couple other options, but if people are happy with that as a way to say what we agreed we wanted to say, which is agencies should put this someplace people can find it. That was my first pass at it.
I like that language. I remember using that language in a previous recommendation. Does anybody not like that language? John, we'll fix the line 112 point. So that's taken care of. So recommendation 8, hearing no opposition, we will go with that language. Thank you, Leanne. Are you fixing the language in line 112?
I am.
Great.
There we go.
Okay. So we're gonna go with that. And then what do we have? The last one?
You had asked about if we had previous language on sort of underrepresented groups, and we previously used in rules on rulemakings the language historically underrepresented or under-resourced groups, if everyone is comfortable with that.
Is anybody not comfortable with using the language we've used before? Okay, all right, we are done with the recommendations. We've got 15 minutes to do the preamble. Thankfully, the preamble tends to be pretty quick. We'll see if we can do it. Hopefully we can, but if not, we'll come up with a plan to cover the preamble, but I think we can probably do it. Let's just grit our teeth and see what we have. We have comments from Bill Funk.
This is just to say, this is language he inserted to reflect his argument that we should have this sort of dual definition of periodic retrospective
which we
review.
accepted, but we accepted that proposal in the recommendations. So is there anybody who opposes that language? I'm assuming at this point that people have read the preamble before they came to the meeting. If that's not true, speak up, or if you're concerned, we can slow down. But I assume that everybody has familiarity with the preamble. That language.
Sorry, Steph Tatham just raised her hand.
Steph, please step forward.
I think this language is great, and I'm generally supportive of it. I just wonder if it's overly limiting. Like, are these really the only two ways to do periodic retrospective review? Is there a more ad hoc way of doing it? So I'm sorry if this complicates either the
No, I don't think it complicates it.
But I wonder if the language could, be broadened perhaps to say that these are ways, but perhaps there are other ways as well. And if you want specific language, maybe done in different ways instead of either of two, and then you would have one way is to engage, and then in the following sentence, another way instead of the other.
Lori.
I think that would be adequate.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Steph. Lori.
I was just going to say that, especially because we talked in the report about some statutes that use language that doesn't map to either one of those options, like as needed or from time to time. So I would agree with Steph there.
Bill Funk? Do we still have Bill?
No problem with that. I just as a sort of a phraseology on line 4 now, the second word, their regulations. I think in agencies regulations, the there is the antecedent is not clear. But otherwise, the changes are fine.
Okay, comment, Jennifer.
Super minor, but I thought just throwing in a for example somewhere in there would just, I'll clarify that this is just a bunch of examples.
I agree with that. How about that, Jennifer?
Perfect.
Perfect. This is great. You're a pro, Leanne. All right, let's go to the next paragraph. I mean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give people a chance to read the paragraph. So we'll take like, 30 seconds per paragraph. If no one speaks after 30 seconds, we'll go to the next one. So let's just everyone read it, make sure we're all okay with it. We'll go to the next one if there's no comments on it.
Aaron, you can also, of course, close the meeting out and take a vote with the understanding that the recommendation would be subject to appropriate revisions by the Committee on Style.
We will do that in 8 minutes if we have to. Thank you, Matt. All right. Okay, hearing none on that paragraph, let's go to the third paragraph. We have a comment there from, who's the comment from?
This is from Robert Gerard. He has proposed language here, which I can put in.
Okay, well, let's read the paragraph and then we'll look at the comment. I like the comment. Does that paragraph or that comment cause anybody any heartburn? All right, let's go to the next paragraph.
We have another comment from Robert on this, which is, I think there's proposed language in here. I think, Robert, you meant this last bit to be the proposed language?
Yes.
Okay.
Can also until.
I have a very minor semantic point earlier in this paragraph when we're done with this.
Was that Steph?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Steph, do you want to take the floor?
On line 32, I would just say there can also be drawbacks as opposed to, saying there are always drawbacks. Yeah.
I agree with that. I suspect that if we had not caught that, the council would have. All right, does anybody have any concerns with Robert's language, Steph's language, or any other language in the paragraph? Okay, hearing none, let's go to the next paragraph. Yeah, I have no problems with that paragraph. Does anybody have any concerns with that very beautifully well done, wonderful paragraph?
This is Steph. I think it's a wonderful paragraph, but in lieu of cost in line 43, I would just suggest trade-off.
What word? Oh, trade-offs. Okay. All right, anybody else? We're going to get this done. Today is the day. There's not going to be a meeting 4 on this. All right, let's go to the next paragraph.
We're on the last one.
Great.
We have a comment from Robert Gerard, which I think is a good one, with a suggestion for how to redo the footnote to be more accurate. And he mentioned this earlier, that the language of learning agendas and evaluation plans is actually from the OMB memos. And he's just proposing to change the footnote to reflect that.
Okay, I'm going to admit my ignorance. I do not know if that is correct. Is there somebody who is closer to this that can confirm that is right? If not, we will put a note on this, which we will confirm. That could be a committee on style. John Kaminsky says he could confirm, and we can take it to the bank. Jonathan Weiner, take it.
Yes, I think this is what I was referring to earlier, that I agreed with Robert. that the Evidence-Based Policy Act itself does not use the phrase learning agendas, but the OMB memos do. And they say that learning agendas is what's meant by section 312 of the, the evaluation plan. So I think what Leanne is having to move it up and down, but I think what Robert wrote there looked correct to me.
All right. Does anybody want to push back? We will still confirm on this one. I'm going to ask Leanne if you can confirm this. But assuming that that is correct, which I have every reason to think that it is, that's the language that we will go with. Any other reactions to this last paragraph? If not, we will take a vote. Way to load the dice. I know, I realized. All right, hearing none, I'm going to give the rules for the vote. And we'll finish right on time. So here's the language on the vote. As noted, only members of the committee and their designated alternates have voting privileges. Staff council will send you a list of committee, oh, that's to me. All right. Okay, so is that the only language I need? Only members of the committee and their designated alternates have voting privileges?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, how have we been doing this? Do we do it in the comment feature? Do we do it by show of hands?
We've been doing it by voice vote typically, or at least in the other committee meetings I've seen, and you ask for yays and nays. And if it's hard to tell, then we can take a more formal vote than that.
Not in the comment, but not in the comment, not in the comment bubbles, please.
Yeah, we can do a roll call style.
All right, we'll do roll call style then as well. I'm not sure the Robert's Rules of Order on this, but I'm going to call for the committee if you have a vote. Everyone in favor of the current draft of the recommendation, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Hearing no nays, we have a recommendation. Congratulations, everybody. This was a lot of work. It took 3 meetings, all the way down to 3 minutes left to spare. Thank you. If there's any comments that you have stylistically about the preamble in particular, please feel free to send to me or to Leanne. We still have a committee of style. The council will still look at it. But I feel really comfortable. Jen, thank you, everybody. This has been great. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, thanks all.
Thanks, Aaron. And I just wanted to say you're the nicest and most inclusive bully I've ever met.
Right, right.
I try. There we go. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.